The 1980s were a simple time. Ronald Reagan was in the White House, the Cold War was the only game in town, and the official U.S. policy on terrorism was refreshingly straightforward. We don't negotiate. Ever. Especially not with a country like Iran, which the State Department had helpfully labeled a state sponsor of terrorism. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, a group called Hezbollah with deep ties to Iran was grabbing American citizens and holding them hostage. A real problem for an administration that prided itself on projecting strength. Publicly, Reagan delivered speeches filled with righteous fury, vowing never to give in to terrorist demands. It was powerful, looked great on television, and was exactly what everyone wanted to hear. Behind the scenes, however, a few key people were looking at this very clear, very public red line and thinking, that looks more like a suggestion. They saw the hostage crisis not just as a problem, but as an opportunity. And that's usually where things start to go spectacularly wrong. A uniquely creative interpretation of foreign policy was about to be born in the shadowy corners of the National Security Council. At the exact same time, halfway across the world, the Reagan administration had another fixation: Nicaragua. The socialist Sandinista government had taken power, and Washington was convinced they were building a communist beachhead in America's backyard. Their solution was to fund a group of anti-communist rebels known as the Contras. The only issue was that the Contras had a bit of a, let's call it, human rights ambiguities. Congress, in a rare moment of oversight, passed something called the Boland Amendment, which explicitly forbade the use of government funds to help the Contras. For most people, a law passed by Congress would be the end of the discussion. For certain individuals in the Reagan administration, it was more like a creative challenge, a puzzle to be solved. The president wanted the Contras funded, law or no law. So the question became, how do you get money to a secret army that Congress has legally cut off? You can't just hold a bake sale. You need off-the-books cash, and you need it to be completely untraceable. And this is where our two stories collide in the most beautifully disastrous way. The White House needed untraceable money for their Nicaraguan side project. Iran, deep in a brutal war with Iraq, desperately needed American-made weapons, specifically anti-tank TOW missiles and HAWK anti-aircraft missiles. The U.S. had publicly banned all weapons sales to Iran. So, you have a hostage crisis, a secret war, and an arms embargo. A sane person would see three completely separate, unsolvable problems. The National Security Council, however, saw a single, elegant, and profoundly illegal solution. The idea was hatched. What if we secretly sold weapons to Iran, the country we publicly despise? We could overcharge them, of course, for the inconvenience. The Iranians, in their gratitude, might persuade Hezbollah to release some American hostages. And the extra profits from the illegal arms sale? Well, that could be diverted to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. It was perfect, a 3-for-1 deal that only required violating a major arms embargo, breaking the Boland Amendment, and lying to absolutely everyone. Running a rogue foreign policy from the White House basement requires a special kind of person. Meet the architect of this whole scheme, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, a gung-ho Marine on the National Security Council staff. North was a man of action, a true believer who saw laws not as barriers, but as inconvenient suggestions from less patriotic people. His direct supervisors, National Security Advisors Robert McFarlane and later John Poindexter, cultivated an environment where this kind of creative problem-solving could flourish. They created an off-the-books operation, a government within the government, accountable to no one but themselves. They used encrypted communication systems, shell corporations, and a network of private arms dealers and financiers to move weapons and money around the globe. It was like a spy movie, except the stakes were real and the script was being written by people who seemed to believe they were above the Constitution. This wasn't just a policy decision, it was a full-blown shadow government operating with the express purpose of circumventing the will of Congress. The logistics of the operation were a masterpiece of convoluted secrecy. It started with getting the weapons to Iran. Since the U.S. couldn't just ship them directly, they used Israel as a middleman. Israel would send older Tau missiles from its own stockpile to Iran, and the U.S. would then secretly replenish Israel's arsenal with newer, better models. The money from Iran would go to the Israelis, who would then transfer it to a Swiss bank account controlled by Oliver North's team. The specific account was at Credit Suisse, under the incredibly creative name Lake Resources, Inc. From there, North's enterprise, as it was called, would skim the profits. A portion of the money went to pay off arms dealers and other middlemen. The rest, the pure profit from overcharging a state sponsor of terrorism for weapons, was funneled to bank accounts controlled by the Contras. Every step was designed to be deniable. Every transaction was hidden behind a wall of secrecy. It was a self-sustaining, off-the-books funding mechanism for a secret war paid for by an enemy state. What could possibly go wrong? Things that are too complicated and too illegal tend to fall apart. On October 5, 1986, it was a Sandinista soldier with a surface-to-air missile who pulled the first thread. A C-123 cargo plane, part of North's secret supply network, was shot down over Nicaragua. The lone survivor, an American ex-CIA operative named Eugene Hasenfuss, was captured. When questioned, Hasenfuss started talking. He admitted he was working for the CIA, dropping supplies to the Contras. The Reagan administration immediately denied everything. They claimed Hasenfuss was a private citizen, a soldier of fortune. It was a classic case of rogue operator. But then a Lebanese magazine, Ash-Shira, published a bombshell story on November 3rd detailing the secret U.S. arms for hostages deal with Iran. Suddenly, the administration was fighting a fire on two fronts. One thread had been pulled in the jungles of Nicaragua, another in the press rooms of Beirut. The whole sweater was about to unravel. With the story breaking, the White House went into panic mode. The priority shifted from running a secret war to destroying all evidence of it. Oliver North and his secretary, Fawn Hall, orchestrated what can only be described as a document-shredding marathon. For days, they fed thousands of pages of incriminating evidence into a shredder, working late into the night. Hall even reportedly smuggled classified documents out of the building, stuffed in her boots and clothing. It was a frantic, almost comical attempt to erase history. North also took to the office computer system, deleting messages from the professional office system, or profs. He thought he was wiping the slate clean. What he didn't realize was that the White House Communications Agency backed everything up. So while North was playing the role of a master spy cleaning house, he was really just deleting the copies. The originals were sitting safely on a backup tape, waiting to be discovered. It's the 1980s equivalent of trying to delete an embarrassing email from the internet. As the official investigations began, a strange case of collective memory loss swept through the highest levels of the administration. Attorney General Edwin Meese launched an initial inquiry, which conveniently gave key players like North more time to shred documents. Then came the Tower Commission, appointed by Reagan himself, which concluded the president had a lax managerial style, but didn't know about the Contra diversion. The main event, however, was the televised congressional hearings in the summer of 1987. Oliver North, now a household name, testified for days, defiantly admitting to his actions in the name of patriotism. He became a folk hero to some, a constitutional menace to others. But when it came to who authorized the scheme, memories got fuzzy. Admiral Poindexter testified that he deliberately kept the president in the dark to maintain plausible deniability. And Reagan himself, when questioned, he uttered the now famous phrase, "I don't recall," over and over. The President of the United States either approved a massive illegal operation, or he had no idea his staff was running a rogue CIA out of his basement. It's hard to decide which is worse. After years of investigations and trials, the legal consequences started to roll in. 14 administration officials were indicted. This included big names like Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger, Robert McFarlane, and of course, Poindexter and North. Oliver North was initially convicted on 3 felony counts, including obstructing Congress. A real slam dunk, right? Not quite. His convictions were later vacated on a technicality, arguing his televised testimony may have prejudiced his trial. A convenient out. Others received sentences of probation or fines. Weinberger was set to stand trial for perjury, which could have been very embarrassing for the former president. But then, on Christmas Eve of 1992, outgoing President George H.W. Bush, who had been Reagan's vice president, issued a wave of pardons. He pardoned Weinberger and 5 others, effectively shutting down any further inquiry into the affair. The message was clear. In Washington, if a scandal is big enough and involves enough powerful people, accountability becomes optional. So, after all that, what was the result? The grand scheme to free the hostages didn't really work. For every hostage released, another one was typically taken. It was a revolving door of misery. The Contras, despite the secret funding, never managed to overthrow the Sandinistas. That would eventually happen through a democratic election years later. No secret wars required. The entire affair was a spectacular failure on every conceivable level. It compromised American foreign policy, eroded public trust, and raised serious questions about the limits of presidential power. A hardline administration, built on the promise of not negotiating with terrorists, was caught secretly selling them advanced weaponry, all to fund an anti-communist crusade that Congress had explicitly forbidden. It's a perfect case study in how ideology, when combined with secrecy and a belief that you're above the law, can lead a government to tie itself into the most ridiculous and dangerous knots imaginable. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!